Welcome to the channel Mirelle Tales. Before we start, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, let's get into today's story.
On the first day I lived with my mother-in-law, she laid down a rule I was only allowed to eat after the rest of the family had finished. I smiled and agreed. The next day, I didn't cook a single thing and delivered a line that left her completely stunned. On our wedding night, while the lingering warmth of our vows still filled the air, my mother-in-law Eleanor coldly tossed a bizarre set of family rules onto our bed. According to her, a daughter-in-law in this house had to know her lowly place. When dinner was served, I was to stand and watch the superiors eat clear the table, and only then was I allowed to eat whatever was left. My husband Paul lowered his head submissively. Eleanor waited triumphantly for the first muffled sobs of a broken daughter-in-law, but they were wrong. I didn't cry. I smiled and agreed immediately. And the very next morning, the prestigious Sterling family was horrified to discover that when a corporate chief financial officer uses absolute malicious compliance to strike back, the price they pay isn't just a few rumbling stomachs. It's the collapse of an entire outdated authoritarian empire. The applause had barely faded, and the scent of expensive floral arrangements still lingered in the historic antebellum estate, located south of Broad in Charleston, South Carolina. I, Lily, a woman accustomed to the dry, hard numbers of corporate finance, had just officially stepped into the Sterling household as Paul's wife. The wedding had been a lavish affair, with guests constantly praising Paul for choosing a wife who was not only beautiful but brilliant and capable. Deep down, however, I knew that living with an old-money Southern family steeped in layers of rigid tradition and social hierarchy would never be a bed of roses. Our bridal suite was elegantly decorated with a plush king-size bed and monogrammed silk pillows. Paul took my hand. His eyes showed the exhaustion of a long day of hosting, but they were still full of affection. He told me that from now on this was our home, and he would always protect and love me. But before the warmth of his touch could fully settle, a sharp knock echoed through the room. The door opened, and Eleanor, my mother-in-law, walked in. She was still wearing the elegant navy blue silk gown from the reception, her makeup flawless, but her sharp eyes couldn't hide a strict, almost oppressive glare. In her hands she carried not a wedding gift, but a worn, leather-bound journal. Eleanor casually sat down on the velvet chair next to the vanity, gesturing for us to sit as well. Her voice was low and firm. Every word felt like a nail being hammered into a board. You two are officially married now. The Sterling family has always valued decorum and a clear hierarchy. Lily dear, you are a daughter-in-law here now. Even though you are family, you need to understand our ways. This journal contains the protocols that generations of Sterling women have had to memorize. I glanced at Paul and saw him slightly bow his head, looking resigned. I smiled faintly, maintaining the most respectful attitude I could muster, and replied, "Of course, Eleanor. I'm new to the family, and still have much to learn. Please guide me so I can fulfill my duties." Eleanor turned the yellowed pages, reading in a steady, authoritative tone. There were rules about posture, how to polish the family silver, and how to address guests at the door. I listened, thinking these were just the quirks of an overly traditional family. But when she reached the final chapter, the air in the room froze. Eleanor looked straight into my eyes, emphasizing every single word. And the most important rule, our strictest family protocol for daily meals and gatherings. You are the new daughter-in-law. You hold the lowest rank in this house. Therefore, you are absolutely forbidden from sitting at the main table while your superiors are dining. You must wait until your husband and I finish eating, clean the table spotlessly, and only then are you permitted to eat whatever is left in the kitchen. This is to forge patience and respect for your elders. Paul jumped. He stammered, "Mom, it's the 21st century. Why do we still have rules like this? Lily works incredibly hard as a CFO all day. Making her wait like that is just cruel." Eleanor shot him a lethal glare. "Keep quiet. This is family protocol, not a negotiation. When I married your father, I had to stay hungry and wait until midnight for your grandmother and the rest of the house to finish eating. That is how I learned my place and earned my authority." "What do you say, Lily?" I looked at the journal, then at my mother-in-law's triumphant face. As a CFO, I was used to handling the most twisted financial loopholes, and I instantly recognized this as a sheer power play. If I cried or rebelled right now, I would be branded a disrespectful, hysterical daughter-in-law, giving her the perfect excuse to oppress me for years. But if I agreed, I would forge my own weapon. I took a deep breath, my face unnaturally calm, and gave a slight nod. "You are absolutely right, Eleanor. I understand you want what's best for me, to teach me the patience and grace of a true sterling woman. I will follow your family protocols, absolutely. Starting tomorrow, I will do exactly as you've instructed. Eleanor looked slightly taken aback by my quick submission. She cleared her throat, closed the journal, and stood up. Good that you understand. Get some rest. Breakfast is at 6:00 a.m. sharp. Don't forget. The moment the door clicked shut, Paul frantically grabbed my shoulders, his voice full of guilt. Lily, I am so sorry. I had no idea she would be this unreasonable. Let me talk to her tomorrow. I won't let you be treated like a second-class citizen. I patted my husband's hand, a bright, calculating spark in my eyes. Don't worry about it, honey. I have my own methods. I'm an accountant, remember, I know how to balance the books, and that includes power and benefits. Let her have her rules. You're going to see just how fascinating this protocol can be. On our first night as a married couple lying in Paul's arms, my mind was already drafting a comprehensive business plan. A plan where I would take the very chains my mother-in-law had just thrown around my neck and use them to back her into an inescapable corner. Tomorrow morning would mark the beginning of a new campaign where the razor-sharp logic of a modern corporate executive would clash with outdated prejudices, using the most devastatingly polite attitude imaginable. At exactly 5:30 a.m., my alarm went off. I felt the cool morning breeze of the Charleston harbor slipping through the window. Out of habit, I got dressed in a sharp, tailored pantsuit and applied my makeup flawlessly. Instead of rushing down to the kitchen to bang pots and pans like an obedient new wife, I sat leisurely at the vanity, spritzing a touch of expensive perfume. At 6:00 a.m. sharp, I walked down to the formal dining room. Eleanor was already seated at the mahogany table, looking visibly impatient. Paul was up too clumsily trying to operate the espresso machine. Seeing me, he called out with relief, "Lily, there you are. Could you whip up some breakfast? Mom is waiting." Eleanor cleared her throat, looked at the grandfather clock, and then glared at me. "The new daughter-in-law is finally downstairs. Go to the kitchen and make some eggs and bacon quickly. We have to eat so you can get to work." I stopped at the bottom of the staircase, offering a dazzling smile, but my feet didn't move an inch toward the kitchen. I crossed my arms, my voice sweet but crystal clear. "Oh, Eleanor, I remember your teachings from last night perfectly. You said I am of the lowest rank and I must not touch the dining table or the food while the superiors haven't finished their meal. I thought about it carefully. If I go into the kitchen, cook and plate the food, I might accidentally touch your or Paul's portions before you've eaten. That would be a massive sign of disrespect. I wouldn't dare defy your protocol." Eleanor froze the silver spoon in her hand, trembling slightly. She narrowed her eyes. "So you plan to let your husband and mother-in-law starve?" I replied instantly, smooth as silk. "Of course not, I'm just fulfilling my exact duties. Since I am not allowed to touch the food of my superiors, I cannot possibly cook for you. I will gladly wait while you and Paul order delivery or cook for yourselves. Once the dining room is empty and the kitchen is spotless, only then will I dare step in to make my own meager portion." Paul stood there paralyzed, nearly dropping his coffee mug. He looked at me then, at his mother, completely speechless. Eleanor's face turned a deep shade of plum. She slammed her hand on the table. "Are you using that logic to get out of doing household chores? I told you to eat last, I didn't tell you not to cook." I maintained my absolute composure, explaining patiently. "Eleanor, in the rulebook, you read it stated, I cannot sit with the family while the superiors dine. But cooking requires tasting the food to check the seasoning. If I cook, I have to taste it. That means I would be eating before or at the same time as you. I couldn't bear it if the Charleston society ladies found out I was so uneducated that I touched your food before you did." With that, I checked my Cartier watch and casually picked up my designer briefcase. "Well, it's time for my morning commute. Please make yourselves at home. Once you're done eating, just leave the dishes. When I get home tonight, I'll clear them and eat my portion then. Have a wonderful day." I walked out the door, leaving Eleanor in a state of absolute shock. I could hear her heavy, furious breathing behind me and Paul calling my name, but I didn't turn back. Walking down the driveway, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I had no desire to be disrespectful, but I knew that if I didn't draw a hard boundary on day one, I would be sucked into a vortex of unreasonable servitude. At the office, I ordered a premium breakfast delivery, a gourmet avocado toast, smoked salmon, and a hot matcha latte. Sitting in my air-conditioned corner office, I leisurely enjoyed my food, a stark contrast to the vision of cowering in a kitchen corner, eating cold leftovers that Eleanor had planned for me. I knew this was only the beginning. A woman like Eleanor, who had spent her whole life wrapped in illusions of grandeur and authority, wouldn't give up easily. But she forgot one crucial thing: these were her rules. and I was just executing them with mechanical precision. In accounting, one wrong digit ruins the whole balance sheet. And in this household, I wasn't going to step a single millimeter out of line with her ridiculous protocol. By the second day, the historic house south of Broad was consumed by a terrifying silence. Usually in traditional homes, this time of morning would be filled with the clatter of pans and the smell of frying bacon. Today, the Sterling kitchen was as cold as a tomb. I woke up on time, going through my multi-step skincare routine at my own pace. Looking in the mirror, my face was radiant without a hint of stress. When I went downstairs, Eleanor was sitting on the living room sofa gripping a copy of the Wall Street Journal, but her eyes were glaring daggers at the kitchen. Paul sat next to her looking anxious, constantly glancing toward the stairs. Seeing me, Eleanor couldn't contain her frustration. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Well, Lily, are you planning to let this house starve again today? I let it slide yesterday because I figured you were tired from the wedding. But are you seriously going to keep up this act of being too lowly to touch the plates?" I walked over calmly and gave her a polite, deferential nod. "Good morning, Eleanor. I assure you it's no act. I am strictly following my duties. Last night I stayed up reading the leather-bound journal you gave me. On page 12, it clearly states that a daughter-in-law must maintain the absolute purity of the elder's meals. I realized that since I just woke up and haven't spiritually cleansed myself, if I touch the pots and pans, I'd be defiling your food. With my lowly status, I must wait until you and Paul finish your breakfast before I dare enter the kitchen to fend for myself." Eleanor threw the newspaper onto the coffee table and stood up sharply. "Stop twisting my words. Are you expecting an old woman like me to go into the kitchen and cook so you can eat after?" I replied gently, my voice as steady as if I were reading a quarterly earnings report. "Oh no, ma'am. I would never force you to cook for me. You and Paul can make whatever you like, or Paul can run down to the local cafe to grab something. As for me, I already told you I will eat last. And since I eat last, I don't need anyone to worry about me. I have my own arrangements." Paul stood up, grabbing my hand, his voice pleading. "Lily, please stop this. Mom is getting older. Can't you just compromise a little? It's just making breakfast. It's not a big deal." I looked straight into Paul's eyes, unwavering. "Paul, you're asking me to compromise, but I am literally doing exactly what your mother asked. It was her rule that I eat last. If I cook now, I have to taste the seasoning, which means I eat before her. Do you want me to be an insolent wife who disrespects your mother by tasting her food before she does? You have to understand, I am trying so hard to be the perfect Sterling daughter-in-law." Eleanor was so furious she couldn't speak. Her face was flushed bright red. She had never faced an opponent who used her own weapons against her with such gentle, devastating precision. She turned to Paul and snapped, "Fine, don't waste your breath on her. Let's see how long she can starve. Let's go out for brunch." I refuse to believe this house will collapse without her. Eleanor aggressively slid her feet into her loafers and dragged Paul out the front door. I stood in the living room watching them disappear past the wrought iron gates and smiled to myself. I walked into the kitchen without touching a single plate belonging to Eleanor. I opened the fridge, took out a carton of organic almond milk I had bought the night before, and poured it into a personal tumbler I had brought from my own apartment. I sat down on the plush sofa, sipping my milk and finishing a novel I had been reading. The silence was magnificent. I wasn't slaving away over a hot stove, nor was I subjected to my mother-in-law's nitpicking about the eggs being too runny or the toast too dark. I was enjoying absolute freedom inside the very cage Eleanor had built. In this war, whoever lost their temper first would lose. Eleanor was running hot. I had infinite patience. I would show her that respect doesn't come from absurd authoritarian rules, but from mutual understanding and equality. If she wanted me to be at the bottom of the hierarchy, I would be at the bottom so thoroughly that she wouldn't be able to stand it. That evening, I came home from the office a bit later than usual. As soon as I stepped inside, a gloomy atmosphere hung heavy in the air. The pungent smell of instant macaroni and cheese wafted from the kitchen. It seemed that after my day-long strike, my mother-in-law and husband had to resort to the fastest option to fill their stomachs. Eleanor was sitting at the dining table, staring at a bowl of mushy neon orange noodles. She looked at me with daggers in her eyes, her voice shaking with rage. "Lily, you are unbelievable. You disappeared all day and left your mother-in-law to eat instant mac and cheese. Do you have any conscience left? Where are your morals as a wife and a daughter-in-law?" I set down my designer tote, leisurely took off my heels and walked toward the dining table. I showed zero fear or guilt. Instead, my face was a mask of deep concern. "Oh my goodness, Eleanor, why are you eating that? Where is Paul? How could he let you suffer like this?" I assumed he would have taken you to a nice restaurant or ordered something exquisite for you. Eleanor slammed her hand on the table. Don't you blame Paul? He worked late, and I was too exhausted to go anywhere. You are the daughter-in-law. It is your responsibility to manage the meals. All this nonsense about not touching the superior's plates is just an excuse for you to be lazy and torture this old woman, isn't it? I let out a soft sigh and sat down on the chair opposite her, making sure to keep a regulation distance from her meal, of course. I looked her in the eye, my voice dropping into a sincere, emotional tone. Eleanor, it breaks my heart that you would say that. I'm not lazy at all. I work incredibly hard at the firm all day. But I have engraved your teachings into my heart. The lowest-ranking member must not touch the dining table until the superiors have finished. If I cooked and accidentally touched your food before you ate, I'd be committing a grave sin of disrespect. You said I had to wait until you finished, and the table was cleared before I could eat. So, have you finished? Because once you're done and the table is wiped completely clean, only then will I dare step into the kitchen to prepare my portion. Eleanor choked on her words. She wanted to yell at me again, but realized she was trapped in the logical snare of her own making. She stammered, Well, you can just cook. I never forbade you from cooking for me. I shook my head, my expression resolute. I can't, Eleanor. I have to do things properly. If I cook for you, I have to handle the ingredients, taste them, and prepare them. That means participating in the superior's meal before I am legally allowed to, according to your rules. If I did that later on, you might accuse me of being an uncultured girl who dared to put herself on the same level as you in the kitchen. I wouldn't know where to hide my face. I'd rather starve. I'd rather you call me lazy than be known as an uneducated daughter-in-law who disrespects the Sterling family traditions. My words hit Eleanor like a bucket of ice water. She sat paralyzed for several seconds, her mouth open, but no sound came out. Her own lectures about the duties of a daughter-in-law had been twisted into an impenetrable barrier, preventing her from getting any service from me. Right at that moment, Paul walked in. Seeing the tension, he quickly intervened. Okay, Mom Lily, let's just calm down. Everyone take a breath. I'll go pick up some takeout for the whole family. I smiled at my husband. Just get enough for you and Eleanor. I already ordered a separate meal for myself. It should be delivered shortly. I will sit in the corner of the kitchen to eat it after you and your mother finish. Just like the protocol dictates. I wouldn't dare interrupt the superior's elegant dining experience. With that, I stood up and walked upstairs, leaving Eleanor sitting there with her cold mac and cheese and the bitter taste of defeat slowly setting in. I knew she wouldn't sleep that night. She was beginning to realize that the absolute power she prided herself on was turning into a shackle that was destroying her own comfortable life. And I, her obedient daughter-in-law, held the key but absolutely refused to unlock it because I was too busy following the rules. By the third morning, things hadn't improved for Eleanor. After a night of overthinking, she likely convinced herself that if she just held her ground, I would eventually cave. She woke up incredibly early, intentionally making loud, clanging noises in the kitchen, hoping I would panic or feel guilty enough to rush down and apologize. I remained as immovable as a mountain. I woke up at 6:00 a.m. and spent even more time on my makeup, looking more glamorous than ever. When I descended the stairs, I found Eleanor sitting at the dining table with a box of stale store-bought pastries from the local gas station. Paul sat next to her, looking absolutely miserable, poking at a dry muffin with his fork. Seeing me, Eleanor lifted her chin defensively. Look at this. Look at what this house has become. Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law going their separate ways. No proper meals. Are you happy now? I rushed over, feigning absolute panic. Oh no, Eleanor, why are you eating gas station food? Paul, why didn't you wake up early to make your mother some oatmeal? Her stomach can't handle processed junk like this. Paul sighed heavily. You know I don't know how to cook, Lily. And Mom refused to go near the stove. I cut him off, my voice dripping with apologies but sharp as a razor. Eleanor, I am so sorry. I wanted to cook for you so badly, but I was terrified. I am terrified of that rule book. You said I am the lowest that I must eat last. I thought about it all night. If I make a pot of soup and you eat first and I eat later, the broth goes down, the meat isn't as fresh. It means I'm either eating your leftovers or I'm forcing you to share a pot with me. I realized that is incredibly disrespectful. So to preserve your absolute dignity, I have decided I will never share pots, pans, or dishes with you again. Eleanor slammed the table. Drop the sarcastic tone. Are you trying to tear this family apart with these ridiculous technicalities? I looked at her, my eyes suddenly overwhelmingly sincere. I'm not being sarcastic at all. I am speaking from the bottom of my heart. You wanted me to know my place. I know it now. My place is to never taint your dining experience, so I will execute this flawlessly. From now on, I will provide my own food. You and Paul do whatever you like. That way you will always have a pure, clean dining table unbothered by this lowly daughter-in-law. Just as I finished speaking, the doorbell rang. I went to the door, and a delivery courier handed me a steaming, fragrant bag. I brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen island, safely distanced from Eleanor's table, of course. The rich aroma of garlic butter steak and warm artisanal bread instantly filled the room, completely overpowering the sad smell of the stale pastries. Eleanor stared at my premium delivery bag, then down at her dry muffin. Her face went pale with anger and probably intense jealousy. She realized that while she was using the rules to force me to eat scraps, I was using the same rules to eat significantly better than she was. I leisurely opened my containers, took out my own silver cutlery, and began eating with immense satisfaction right at the kitchen counter. I didn't offer any to her nor to Paul, for the simplest reason I wouldn't dare offer the superiors the food of a subordinate. I wouldn't want to shorten your lifespan, Eleanor. Paul looked at me. His eyes showed utter helplessness, but also a begrudging sliver of respect. As for Eleanor, she sat there, the bite of muffin in her mouth turning to ash. She was starting to understand that her authoritarian grip was being eroded by her daughter-in-law's terrifying obedience. In this battle, I hadn't yelled, I hadn't cursed, I hadn't thrown a single tantrum. I simply utilized what she had handed me, and I knew this was just the first lesson she needed to learn. Respect must be built on love, not archaic dogma. I would continue to be exactly this obedient until she realized that her precious rulebook was the very wall separating her from a truly happy family. Take your time eating, Eleanor, I called out cheerfully while slicing into my perfectly medium-rare steak. I'll wait until you're completely finished before I clean up your plates for you. I'm a good daughter-in-law, don't you worry. Eleanor didn't say a word. She stood up, abandoned her pastry, marched straight to her bedroom and slammed the door. Paul and I locked eyes. He shook his head slowly, and I knew I had just won another round in this psychological war. After 3 days of intense Cold War, the atmosphere in the Charleston estate was thick as lead. Paul was a gentle man, somewhat passive, having grown up entirely under Eleanor's massive shadow. He was trapped between a mother who worshipped aristocratic traditions and a sharp-witted wife who refused to be bullied. That night, while I was reviewing financial spreadsheets in our bedroom, Paul walked in. His face was pale, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. He sat next to me, took my hand, and let out a long, heavy sigh. His voice was low and pleading. Lily, I know Mom crossed the line giving you that rulebook on our wedding night. But look at us, this house doesn't even feel like a home anymore for the past few days. Mom is old, she's stubborn. You're the daughter-in-law. If you just take a step back and compromise, what would it really cost you? I put my documents down and turned to look him dead in the eye. There was no anger in my gaze, only cold, hard clarity. I asked him, You want me to compromise? Tell me exactly how. Have I talked back to her once? Have I violated a single rule in the book she gave me? Paul looked flustered. He rubbed his hands together. Well, technically, yes, you're following her words, but you're doing it in such an extreme way. She told you to eat last, but she didn't say you couldn't cook for the family. You could just cook normally, wait for her to eat, and then eat your portion. That keeps the peace and fulfills the tradition. I gave a dry, cynical laugh, a laugh of profound disappointment in the man I had chosen to marry. Paul, you make it sound so simple. If I go into the kitchen to cook, I have to taste the food. I have to plate it. And the moment I do, your mother will call me an ungrateful brat who dares to touch the food before the elders. Don't you get it? She didn't want me to just cook. She wanted me to submit. She wanted me to accept a subhuman status in this house. I am doing exactly what she asked, so she can see firsthand how insane her rules are. Don't ask me to back down because I haven't done a single thing wrong to back down from. Paul started losing his patience. He stood up and paced the room. But look at her. She's eating frozen dinners and instant noodles. Her stomach issues are flaring up. You're a CFO, Lily. You manage hundreds of employees. Why can't you use some of that diplomacy to keep the peace at home? I'm caught in the middle and I am exhausted. I stood up, walked over to him, and adjusted his collar. My voice was gentle but made of steel. You are exhausted because you refuse to face the truth. The truth is, your mother is using archaic traditions to abuse your wife, and you want your wife to just endure that abuse so you can have a quiet life. Paul, I married you because I love you. But I did not move in here to be a slave to 19th century ideologies. I am following your mother's laws. Why are you blaming me? If it pains you so much to see her eat poorly, why don't you go into the kitchen and cook her a meal? Or do you also believe that the kitchen is only for women, and lowly women must just swallow their options? Pride. Paul was left utterly speechless. He looked at me like I was a stranger. Perhaps he had never realized that the slender, elegant woman he married possessed logic so sharp and unyielding. He couldn't argue with me because every word I said was based on the very rules Eleanor had written herself. He let his arms drop in defeat and quietly walked out of the room. Watching him retreat, my heart ached slightly, but I knew I couldn't afford to be soft. If I compromised today, I would spend the rest of my life bowing my head in my own home. This war wasn't just about protecting my stomach. It was about protecting my dignity and asserting my equality as a woman in this household. The next evening, after a highly stressful day at the corporate office, I decided to treat myself to a lavish dinner. I stopped by Whole Foods and bought 2 fresh Maine lobster tails, European butter garlic, and a bottle of crisp Chardonnay. When I got home, Eleanor and Paul were sitting at the dining table. Before them sat a desperately salty plate of microwaved meatloaf and a bowl of overboiled graying green beans. I greeted them politely and strolled into the kitchen. Following the protocol to the letter, I stood and waited. Leaning against the sub-zero refrigerator, I calmly watched them eat. Eleanor ate while throwing me dirty looks. She aggressively stabbed a piece of meatloaf, chewing loudly and muttering, "A good, modest meal. Better than that fancy, overpriced garbage that just makes people fat." I smiled and said nothing. Only when Paul and Eleanor put their forks down did I make my move. I waited for Eleanor to leave the dining room and turn on the television in the parlor. Then, I went to work. I didn't use any of the family's pots or pans. I used a brand new cookware set I had bought for myself. The rich, intoxicating scent of garlic and butter searing the lobster tails quickly wafted through the house, slipping into the parlor and floating upstairs. The smell was phenomenal, completely transforming the previously dreary atmosphere. I heard the TV volume drop, replaced by Eleanor, clearing her throat loudly and repeatedly. I leisurely plated the bright red lobster tails, glistening in garlic butter on the kitchen island. I didn't sit at the main dining table where Eleanor had just eaten. I stood right at the island to eat. Every bite of the sweet, firm lobster meat mixed with the rich butter was heavenly. Eleanor couldn't take it anymore. She marched into the kitchen, hands on her hips, glaring at me. "Lily, what kind of behavior is this? You buy this extravagant food and stand here eating it all by yourself. Don't you have any shame? You have a mother-in-law and a husband in this house, and you don't even have the decency to offer us a bite." I put down my fork, dabbed my mouth with a napkin, and looked at her with the most innocent expression I could fake. "Oh, Eleanor, you taught me that the lowest-ranking member cannot touch the food of the superiors, nor sit at their table. I figured my food is just cheap groceries." I picked up myself. "Given my low status, how could I dare offer this lobster to you? You are the superior. Eating modest traditional food fits your aristocratic status. If I offered you this rich, fatty food and it upset your stomach or spiked your cholesterol, I'd never forgive myself. I am doing this to maintain boundaries and protect your health." Eleanor was struck dumb. Her eyes were glued to the half-eaten lobster tail. She loved fine dining, but her own pride and her own rules had completely blocked her from enjoying any of it. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You selfish girl. Are you using my son's money to live like a queen while we suffer?" I replied calmly. "Ma'am, this was paid for with my CFO salary. Since the day I moved in, I haven't spent a dime of Paul's money. Furthermore, since I eat separately per your rules, I realized I need to keep my finances entirely separate, so you won't ever have to worry about me draining the family resources. I eat my food, you eat yours. That's the fairest way, isn't it?" Eleanor huffed, turned around, and stomped upstairs, her footsteps echoing heavily on the hardwood floor. I looked at the lobster, then glanced toward the parlor where Paul was sitting, head bowed in silence. It was a delicious meal, but a ripple of sadness went through me. I didn't want to live like this forever. But if Eleanor refused to change, I would happily dine on fine cuisine alone for a very long time. By Sunday morning, as the sunlight peeked through the Spanish moss outside the window, Eleanor decided to launch a massive counterattack. She summoned both Paul and me to the living room. In her hand was the old leather journal. Today, she looked absolutely murderous, her thin lips pressed into a tight, pale line. She slammed the journal onto the antique coffee table. The sharp crack echoed in the quiet room. I called you both here to make things perfectly clear. Lily, you have been in this house for a week, and your behavior has crossed every boundary of my patience. You use the family rules as an excuse to torture your mother-in-law and dodge your responsibilities. Look around. Has the stove been turned on once for a family meal since you arrived? You treat this historic home like a hotel. You come and go, order fancy food for yourself, and ignore your family. What kind of woman are you? I maintained my perfect posture, sitting straight, hands folded in my lap. Eleanor, I have constantly listened to and strictly followed everything you taught me on my wedding night. You told me to eat last, so I eat last. You told me not to touch the dining table until the superiors are finished, and I have absolutely never dared to commit such an offense. You said I am the lowest-ranking member, and I have never once tried to put myself on your level. I truly don't understand what I've done wrong to make you so angry. Eleanor screamed. Stop using that silver tongue to manipulate the situation. I meant you are supposed to cook the meals, serve us, wait for us to finish, and then eat. Not let us starve while you buy gourmet food for yourself. You are a daughter-in-law. You must care for your mother-in-law and husband first, and yourself last. I sighed softly, looking deeply conflicted. Eleanor, you explicitly taught me that I cannot touch the food of the superiors. If I cook, I have to taste it. That means I eat before you. And what if my hands accidentally touch your silverware? That's a grave disrespect. I thought about it endlessly, and the only way to avoid breaking your rules and maintaining your dignity is for everyone to fend for themselves. You told me to eat separately. How could I dare share my food with you? I respect you too much to taint your meals. Eleanor snapped. She stood up and pointed right at my face. Get out! Get out of my house immediately. The Sterling family has no room for an uneducated, manipulative girl who uses technicalities to abuse her mother-in-law. Paul panicked and jumped up to intervene. Mom, please calm down. Lily is just trying to follow your instructions. Let's just talk this out. Why are you kicking her out? I stood up. There was no fear or panic in my demeanor. I looked at Eleanor, completely unfazed. If you want me to leave, I will leave immediately. But before I go, I want to ask you one question. Did you create this protocol to build a happy family, or to build a prison for your daughter-in-law? If you wanted an unpaid servant who blindly obeys and accepts humiliation, you picked the wrong woman. But if you want a daughter-in-law who respects her elders but also maintains her own self-worth, you need to rewrite that journal. I'll go pack my bags. I turned my back, my heart feeling incredibly light. I knew I had done nothing wrong. Paul's passivity and Eleanor's authoritarianism had made this house suffocating. If I had to leave to keep my dignity, I was ready. But I also knew for a fact that Eleanor wouldn't let me leave so easily. Because there was a massive financial card she hadn't anticipated yet. As I was packing my clothes into my Rimowa suitcase, Paul ran in. He hugged me from behind, his voice desperate. Lily, please don't go. Mom was just talking out of anger. I'm begging you, stay. I will fix this with her. I gently pried his hands away and turned to face him. Paul, this isn't about coming or going. It's about equality. You see it right. Your mother treats me like an exotic animal that needs to be broken and tamed. I can't live like this. But fine. For you, I will stay one more time. But from this moment on, everything changes. I walked back downstairs. Eleanor was sitting blankly in the living room. I didn't bring my suitcase. Instead, I carried a single sheet of paper. I sat down opposite her. My professional CFO voice took over. Eleanor, after careful consideration, I've realized that living together with such divided rules is incredibly inefficient and costly. Because I eat separately, and am legally barred by your rules from using the shared kitchen to serve you, I am restructuring my financial contributions to this household, effective immediately. Eleanor looked up suspicious. What are you doing? I calmly presented my case. Before the wedding, Paul and I agreed to contribute $2,500 a month to you for the estate's upkeep and groceries. However, since I do not eat the family food, and I am not permitted to share resources with you, paying that amount is mathematically illogical. I have calculated the exact metrics. From now on, I will only pay for the exact percentage of electricity, water, and Wi-Fi that I personally consume. Based on the utility meters, my share is exactly $150 a month. I will keep the rest of my income to feed myself outside. Paul will pay his share, and you will manage your own. It's a perfectly fair, itemized breakdown, completely in line with the separate lifestyle you designed. Eleanor's face drained of color. Her late husband had left her the house, but she had very little liquid income. The estate's massive taxes and upkeep relied entirely on Paul's salary and now my substantial contribution. Losing over $2,000 a month made her physically sick. She stammered, You're calculating things down to the penny. $150. What about my labor? I managed this entire estate. I smiled sweetly. Eleanor, you manage the estate for yourself and Paul. I wouldn't dare trouble you. I buy my own food, wash my own separate dishes, and clean my own room. $150 generously covers my footprint here. You taught me to know my place, so I must also protect my finances to secure Paul's and my future right. Eleanor glared at Paul, praying her son would intervene. But Paul just looked at his shoes. He knew that if he forced me to pay more, I would walk out the door forever. Eleanor's rage was suddenly swallowed by a very real financial panic. She realized her authoritarian power couldn't cover the massive property taxes. She furiously snatched the $150 cash I placed on the table without saying a word. I knew I had just delivered a critical strike to her biggest weakness, her wallet and her pride. True equality isn't just won with logic, it's backed by financial independence. And as a CFO, I never lose on the balance sheets. After 3 consecutive days of forcing herself to eat frozen meals and cheap takeout to win a standoff with her daughter-in-law, Eleanor's health began to fail. Her chronic acid reflux flared up, leaving her clutching her stomach and grimacing all afternoon. Paul was at the office until late evening, leaving no one to care for her but me. On Wednesday afternoon, I came home early. Walking in, I saw Eleanor hunched over in the kitchen. She was trying to chop some vegetables, but her hands were shaking and her face was pale. Seeing me, she lost her usual haughty demeanor, merely glancing at me before looking back down at the cutting board. I strolled into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and leaned against the doorframe watching her. I spoke up, my voice dripping with exquisite, polite concern. Oh my, Eleanor, why are you in the kitchen? Your reflux is acting up. You really should be resting. Eleanor let out a ragged breath, her voice weak. If I don't cook, what are we supposed to eat? Paul is working late. I can't let him go hungry. As for you, I wouldn't dare bother you. I stepped closer, looking at the messy pile of vegetables. You're cutting those wrong, Eleanor. If you leave the stems that thick, they'll be too tough to digest and your stomach will hurt worse. Let me show you. I stood right next to her and pointed at the vegetables, but I absolutely did not touch them or help her. I kept my promise. The subordinate does not touch the belongings of the superior. I praised her effusively. You are just so dedicated, Eleanor. At your age, still hand-cooking meals for your son. Paul is so lucky. I admire you so much. If I stepped in there, I'd probably be clumsy and ruin your perfect meal, and that would be a terrible sin. Eleanor looked up at me. Her eyes showed profound exhaustion, and hidden behind her proud facade was a silent plea. Her voice trembled. Lily, could you just help me cook dinner tonight? I'm so tired. I can barely stand. I smiled, a gentle but utterly unyielding smile. Eleanor, I want to help you so badly. I really do. But I'm terrified. Do you remember the family protocol? If I touch your pots and pans right now tomorrow when you feel better, you'll accuse me of overstepping, of taking advantage of your weakness to seize control of your kitchen. I'd rather see you struggle a little bit today than have you heartbroken over my lack of manners tomorrow. You can do it. You're almost done. With that, I cheerfully walked upstairs to take a bubble bath, leaving Eleanor stranded in the middle of the cold kitchen. I knew I was being ruthless, but this ruthlessness was necessary. For years, she had treated a daughter-in-law's service as an automatic right, a favor she granted by allowing someone to serve her. Now she had to learn that when you strip away equality, you also strip away your right to be helped. That night, Paul came home to find his mother collapsed on the sofa and the kitchen a disaster zone. He ran upstairs, frustrated. Lily, you saw, Mom was sick. Why didn't you help her? You're taking this way too far. I looked at him calmly. I stood right next to her for 20 minutes, giving her verbal support and advice. What did you want me to do? Touch her food and get screamed at for breaking protocol? I am protecting your family's sacred traditions. If you feel so bad for her, you should leave work early and cook for her yourself. Don't dump this on me, when your mother is the one who legally banned me from touching her food. Paul went dead silent. He finally realized that in this house the rules were turning around to torture the very people who made them. As for me, I was still the most obedient daughter-in-law in the world, because I was following the rules without missing a single comma. After weeks of this grueling Cold War, a sudden shift occurred. But it wasn't the warmth of family reconciliation. It was the beginning of Eleanor's final desperate scheme. On Saturday morning, while I was sipping Earl Grey tea by the window, Eleanor marched into the living room looking strangely energized. She was wearing a crisp beige cashmere cardigan, and on her lips was a calculating smile. She sat down, tapping her manicured fingers on the coffee table. "Lily, dear, you've been a part of this family for a while now. Next weekend is the annual Sterling Family Heritage Dinner. It is the most important gathering of our extended family in Charleston. Usually I handle everything, but since you are the new daughter-in-law, I want you to take charge of the cooking. Show the entire Sterling family what a capable traditional wife Paul married." I put my teacup down, the gears in my head spinning instantly. I smiled politely. "Eleanor, that is a huge responsibility, and as a daughter-in-law, I'd love to contribute. But have you forgotten my strict adherence to your protocol? I am the lowest rank. If I cook the feast and touch the ceremonial family dishes and the elders' food, the aunts and uncles will accuse me of not knowing my place. You are the matriarch. Your reputation in Charleston society is legendary. I wouldn't dare usurp you." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Don't worry about that. This is a special occasion. I am officially giving you full authority in the kitchen. Go all out. Make a massive southern feast, roasted turkey, glazed ham, all the sides. Make Paul and me proud. You're a CFO. You know how to manage a project. Consider this an opportunity to make up for recent misunderstandings. Do we have an agreement?" I saw right through her. She wanted to use the immense pressure of the snobby Charleston extended family to force me into servitude. If I did a great job, she would take the credit for taming me. If I failed or refused, she would use the entire family to publicly humiliate me as a lazy, useless modern woman. I nodded graciously. "If you trust me that much, Eleanor, I accept. I will prepare a heritage dinner this family will never forget. You just rest and prepare to entertain the guests." Paul, standing nearby, looked incredibly relieved, thinking this meant the war was over. He chimed in. "That's wonderful. Just let me know what groceries you need, Lily. I'll help you." I looked at him, my smile deepening into something completely unreadable. "Don't worry about a thing, Paul. I know exactly what to do to honor the exact status your mother expects of me." For the next week, I went to work as usual. Eleanor noticed I wasn't buying massive amounts of groceries, ordering a turkey, or prepping any side dishes. She started getting anxious. Every night she'd ask Lily, "How is the dinner prep coming? Do you need the number for my butcher?" I always answered calmly, "Don't worry, Eleanor. I have a comprehensive plan. I'm a financial director. Everything is scheduled down to the minute. You'll have exactly what you need on the day." In reality, I hadn't ordered a single piece of food. The only thing I brought into the house the night before the dinner was a massive, incredibly expensive floral centerpiece. I placed it perfectly on the dining table. Eleanor checked the empty Sub-Zero fridge and the spotless cold kitchen. She panicked, running up to my room. "Lily, the dinner is tomorrow afternoon. There is no food in this house. Are you planning to shop in the morning? How will you cook a feast for 20 people in 4 hours?" I calmly filed my nails, my voice sweet as honey. "Eleanor, I told you I had a special surprise planned for you. Did you forget your own teachings? A lowly daughter-in-law cannot touch the food of the superiors. If I started cooking, the house would smell, and I'd have to taste the glazes and the gravies. That would be a massive violation of protocol. I have prepared a tribute for you tomorrow that is perfectly aligned with the rules. Get some beauty sleep. You'll need to look your best for the family tomorrow." Eleanor left highly suspicious, but trying to convince herself that I must have secretly catered the entire event from a high-end restaurant to be delivered the next day. "You better not embarrass me tomorrow, or I will end you," she hissed before shutting the door. I smiled at the closed door. "The surprise I have for you will be talked about in Charleston for the next 20 years. In a game of rules, the one who enforces them to the letter always wins." And tomorrow she would see just how spectacular her protocol looked in practice. Sunday afternoon arrived. The historic house was buzzing. Aunts and uncles from Mount Pleasant, cousins from Kiowa Island, the entire snobby Sterling clan was in attendance. Eleanor wore a stunning violet silk dress, and her signature pearls radiating Southern hospitality. She boasted to everyone, "Oh yes, my new daughter-in-law is so capable." She insisted on handling the entire dinner so I could rest. "Just relax, everyone. The feast will be out shortly." The judgmental aunts nodded in approval. Well, you really trained her right, Eleanor. Good to see some young women still respect tradition. By 4:00 p.m., the parlor was packed, drinks were flowing, but strangely, there was no smell of roasting meat from the kitchen. No clatter of pans. Paul was pacing nervously, constantly checking the kitchen and looking at me. I was wearing a chic designer dress, carrying a silver tray of champagne, gracefully serving the guests, and charming everyone in the room. At 4:30 p.m., Uncle Charles, the family patriarch, checked his Rolex. Eleanor, it's getting late. Why don't we see the dinner spread yet? Where is your daughter-in-law? Tell her to start bringing the food out. Eleanor broke into a cold sweat. She power-walked into the kitchen and found me leisurely polishing a champagne flute. She whisper-screamed, "Lily, where is the food? Are you trying to destroy me?" I looked at her, my eyes wide and innocent. "Eleanor, I'm waiting for you. I've served all the drinks. But as for the meal, I told you I am too low-ranking to touch the food of the elders. Today, the entire senior Sterling family is here. I wouldn't dare commit the ultimate sin of handling their food before they eat." Eleanor's eyes bulged. "What are you talking about? You didn't cook anything." I smiled. "Don't worry. I have prepared the ultimate display of respect. Watch me." Before she could stop me, I walked straight into the center of the parlor, commanding the attention of the entire room. I tapped my glass, clearing my throat. "Uncle Charles, aunts, cousins, and honored guests. Today is the Sterling Heritage Dinner. As the new daughter-in-law, I should have been the one to cook. However, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, is a woman of unparalleled dedication to tradition and family protocol. She taught me on my wedding night that a new daughter-in-law is of the lowest rank and must never ever touch the food of her superiors to maintain the absolute purity and dignity of the family." Murmurs broke out. Uncle Charles frowned at Eleanor. I continued, my voice ringing with fake admiration. "Because of her deep respect for all of you, Eleanor decided that today she must personally cook the entire feast herself. She told me that only the hands of the esteemed matriarch are pure enough to serve this family. She ordered me to strictly stay out of the kitchen and only serve drinks. Eleanor is in the kitchen right now, ready to begin. Please give her a moment, and you will all taste the incredible culinary skills of the woman who single-handedly upholds the Sterling legacy." Eleanor stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, all the blood draining from her face. I had trapped her in a public, inescapable corner. If she denied it, she would be admitting her sacred family protocol was a lie and she was just trying to bully me. If she demanded I cook, I would refuse based on the very rules she bragged about. Uncle Charles spoke up, his voice booming. "Well, Eleanor, you are awfully strict with the girl, but your dedication to the family is commendable. Get in there and cook, we're starving. And aunts go help her so the new girl doesn't taint our food with her low rank." The snooty aunts who secretly loved seeing Eleanor taken down a peg immediately swarmed her. "Oh, Eleanor, you're so traditional. Let's get to cooking. We'll chop, but you have to do all the seasoning and cooking just like you told Lily." Eleanor was choking on her own fury. She shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, but with the entire family watching, she was forced to tie an apron over her violet silk dress and march to the stove. The pristine kitchen turned into a war zone. A 70-year-old woman who hadn't cooked a large meal in years was now trying to magically produce a feast for 20 people out of thin air. She frantically sent Paul to the premium grocery store down the street to buy pre-cooked hams, rotisserie chickens, and whatever sides he could find. Paul ran back and forth, sweating through his suit. Meanwhile, I stood in the parlor, chatting effortlessly with the guests. Occasionally, I'd peek into the kitchen and call out, "Eleanor, don't use too much salt. Uncle Charles has high blood pressure." "Oh, Eleanor, make sure you slice that ham evenly. The Mount Pleasant cousins are very picky about presentation." Eleanor was crying tears of rage over the stove. Her hands shook as she hacked at the store-bought meat. Splatters of grease ruined her silk dress. She desperately wanted my help, but every time she looked up, the aunts were watching her like hawks, eager to remind her of her own pure food rule. Dinner was finally served 3 hours late. When the mismatched, chaotic spread of dry chicken, haphazardly sliced ham, and cold sides hit the table, the extended family was appalled. Uncle Charles muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Eleanor, you're getting too old for this. Why invent these ridiculous archaic rules? You should have just let Lily cater it. You embarrassed yourself and made us all wait for this mess." Eleanor stared at her plate, humiliated beyond words. When everyone sat down to eat, I followed the protocol perfectly. I stood quietly in the corner of the dining room. When they asked me to sit, I replied softly, "Oh, I couldn't dare." Eleanor taught me I must wait until the superiors finish and the table is cleared before I am allowed to eat. "I will stand here and serve you. Whispers erupted across the table. The family immediately realized how cruel and draconian Eleanor had been. The gossip began instantly. Eleanor's reputation as the perfect, graceful matriarch evaporated in minutes. She sat at the head of the table, unable to swallow a single bite. She looked at me and saw my polite, victorious smile. She knew then that her rulebook hadn't just failed. It had publicly executed her authority in this house. After the disastrous dinner, the guests finally left. Eleanor collapsed onto the sofa, physically and mentally broken. The grand house was eerily quiet, but it was the silence before a massive shift in power. I walked over, placed a glass of sparkling water on the table, and said softly, "Get some rest, Eleanor. I'll clean the dishes. And then I will eat whatever scraps are left, exactly as you requested." Eleanor didn't reply. She squeezed her eyes shut, and bitter tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. The war was over, and it was time to establish a new world order. In the days following the Thanksgiving disaster, Eleanor became the laughingstock of the South of Broad social circles. The wealthy women who prided themselves on propriety couldn't stop gossiping about the Eat Last protocol that backfired spectacularly. Everywhere Eleanor went, from the country club to the high-end boutiques on King Street, she felt the mocking stares. One afternoon, she ran into her neighbor, Mrs. Harrington. Mrs. Harrington was sweeping her porch and called out with dripping sarcasm, "Oh, Eleanor, out running errands yourself. Where is your lovely daughter-in-law? Or is she still trapped in the corner waiting for you to finish eating before she can leave the house?" Eleanor turned bright red, clutching her purse. "Lily is at her corporate job. She handles big accounts. I can do my own errands." Mrs. Harrington laughed. "Well, everyone is saying you trained her too well. You told her not to touch the food, and she let you cook for 20 people by yourself. You must be so proud of how obedient she is. It brought tears to your eyes in the kitchen, I heard." Eleanor practically ran back home. She realized that the absolute authority she had spent her life cultivating was now a public joke. Meanwhile, I continued going to work unfazed. I knew the court of public opinion was on my side, but I didn't gloat. My goal was never to destroy my mother-in-law. It was to shatter the absurd, suffocating chains she tried to put on my marriage. I knew that once her illusions of grandeur were stripped away, she would have no choice but to face reality. On Wednesday night, the air in the house was heavy. After another silent, separate dinner, Eleanor slapped her hand on the table. Her voice was raspy. "Paul, Lily, come to the living room. We need to talk." Paul looked at me with exhausted eyes. We sat opposite Eleanor on the vintage sofa. She looked years older. The sharp, aggressive glint in her eyes replaced by sheer exhaustion. She looked at me and spoke with profound bitterness. "You won, Lily. You took my family rules and used them to turn me into a tyrannical monster in front of the whole town. I never imagined a young girl could be so calculating and ruthless." I maintained my calm professional posture. "Eleanor, I never wanted to win or lose. I told you from the beginning I was simply executing your rules with absolute precision. If the result of your protocol is public humiliation, that isn't my fault, it's the fault of the protocol itself. It has no place in the modern world, and it has no basic human empathy." Paul finally found his courage. His voice cracked. "Mom, please. We can't live like this anymore. I come home from work and I'm terrified to walk through the door. You tried to humiliate my wife and it ended up destroying you. I love you both, but I can't survive this toxic environment." Eleanor sighed, looking between her son and me. The loneliness and defeat had finally broken her. Seeing the timing was perfect, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a freshly printed, legally formatted document. I slid it across the coffee table toward her. "What is this?" she asked, squinting. "This," I said calmly, "is a modern household agreement. I drafted it based on the rights and responsibilities of every adult in this house. If we are going to live under the same roof without hating each other, we need a new operating model. One based on equality and mutual respect, not unconditional servitude." Eleanor picked up the paper, her hands shaking slightly. She began to read the terms I had spent the night perfecting. Paul leaned in to read it too, and a spark of hope lit up his eyes. It was concise, fair, and airtight, the work of a true CFO. I explained the terms as she read. Section 1. The complete abolishment of dietary hierarchy. In this house, everyone is equal. The dining table is a place for family. Whoever gets home first cooks. Whoever gets home late cleans. We sit at the same table, eat the same food at the same time. There are no superiors and subordinates when it comes to a basic human need. Section 2, Financial Transparency. Paul and I will contribute a fair fixed percentage to the household account to cover groceries, taxes, and a weekly cleaning service, so you don't have to do heavy labor. But in return, you do not use financial guilt to control our lives. Section 3, Shared Labor. I work late during the week, so I will handle evening cleanup. Paul will handle grocery shopping and morning prep. On weekends, I will cook the meals. You will act in an advisory role, sharing your recipes and experience, not barking orders. And finally, privacy. You do not enter our private quarters without knocking and being invited in. In return, we respect your space. Any grievances will be communicated directly and politely, without relying on ancient passive-aggressive rulebooks. I looked straight into Eleanor's eyes. Eleanor, if you sign this agreement, I promise you I will be the most supportive, caring daughter-in-law you could ask for. I will take care of you when you are sick, and Paul and I will make the Sterling name proud through our actual success and happiness. But if you refuse to sign, Paul and I are moving into a luxury condo downtown tomorrow morning. The lease is already drafted. Paul will have to choose between staying here to be served by you in an empty house or coming with his wife to build a free life. Paul grabbed my hand and looked at his mother, pleading, "Mom, please. Just let us be a normal family. Don't make me choose." Seeing the absolute resolve in my eyes and the desperate heartbreak in her sons, the final brick in Eleanor's fortress crumbled. She realized that if she clung to her archaic pride, she wouldn't just lose her reputation, she would lose her only son, her pride and joy, and spend the rest of her life utterly alone. My calculated strike forced her to look at the cold, hard truth. I always thought. Her voice trembled. I thought doing this was protecting the family legacy, making sure you knew respect. I didn't realize it was tearing us apart. Let the society ladies laugh at me, but if Paul leaves me, I have nothing left. Eleanor picked up the Mont Blanc pen from the table. She looked at me one last time, searching for confirmation that I would actually treat her well if she surrendered. I gave her a slow, sincere nod, a genuine commitment. She signed her name at the bottom of the document. Her signature was shaky, but final. When the pen lifted, Paul let out a massive breath, looking like a weight had been lifted off his chest. He threw his arms around his mother, tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Mom. You'll see we're going to be so much happier." I stood up, walked over, and gently took Eleanor's hand. It was the first time I had initiated contact without a defensive motive. "Get some sleep, Eleanor. Tomorrow is Sunday. I'll wake up early and make us shrimp and grits. We will eat breakfast together at the same table." Eleanor didn't say anything, but she gently squeezed my hand. Her surrender wasn't a defeat to a bitter enemy. It was a surrender to logic, equality, and family love. That old leather-bound journal was now just a sad relic of the past, making way for a new era of understanding. The next morning, the Charleston sun poured golden light over the historic estate. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Sterling kitchen was filled with laughter, conversation, and the rich smell of bacon and simmering grits. I was at the stove and Eleanor came down in a comfortable cashmere set. She didn't sit at the table glaring at me. Instead, she walked up to the counter. "Here, let me stir the grits. If you don't keep them moving, they get clumpy." I smiled and handed her the wooden spoon. "Thank you, Eleanor." I was just about to add the sharp cheddar. Paul walked in, grabbed a cup of coffee, and leaned against the counter, beaming at the sight of the two of us working together. Wow, the two best women in Charleston cooking together. I'm going to need a second plate. At 8:00 a.m. breakfast was served at the main dining table. For the first time, 3 chairs were pulled out together. I guided Eleanor to the head of the table, and Paul and I sat on either side. No one stood. No one waited. No one ate leftovers. Eleanor took a bite of the shrimp and grits. She nodded in genuine approval. "This is quite good, Lily. Very flavorful. Just a dash more hot sauce next time," noted. I laughed. "Eat up, Eleanor." The meal was warm and light. We talked about Paul's work, my upcoming financial quarter, and our plans to finally plant new hydrangeas in the garden. Eleanor even put a piece of crispy bacon on my plate, then one on Paul's. The harsh lines on her face had softened significantly. After breakfast, I stood up to clear the plates, but Eleanor stopped me. "Leave them. I'll load the dishwasher. You and Paul go take a walk down by the Battery. You two haven't had a moment to yourselves in weeks. I can handle a few plates." I looked at Paul and he winked at me. We walked out the front door, hand in hand, feeling the crisp, refreshing breeze coming off the harbor. I knew there would still be disagreements in the future. No family is perfect. but from now on we had a solid foundation built on equality and respect. My war didn't end in punishment. It ended in healing. I had used cold logic to protect myself, but ultimately, I used my heart to save the family. The historic house south of Broad was no longer a prison of aristocratic traditions. It was finally a home where everyone had an equal seat at the table. As a CFO, I had to say it was the most successful balance sheet I had ever reconciled, the perfect balance between personal dignity and family harmony. To everyone reading this story about the sharp-witted Sterling daughter-in-law, perhaps we can all agree that respect in a family doesn't come from strict authoritarian rules, but from mutual empathy. The greatest lesson here is equality. When we use power to oppress, we inadvertently build walls between ourselves and the people we love most. At the same time, the wisdom of a modern woman isn't found in screaming matches, but in using intellect and unwavering boundaries to protect her dignity. Let us remember that a family meal is only truly delicious when everyone has a seat at the table. Family is a place for love and grace, not a place to rank who is superior and who is subordinate.